Some people don't destroy with their fists. They destroy with paperwork, with signatures, with the slow administrative grind of making someone disappear from their own life, while everything around them looks perfectly legal. This story is about a man like that, but he's not the one telling it, because men like that never tell the truth about what they've done. My name is Everett Calhoun. I'm 47 years old. I'm a licensed social worker in Buncombe County, North Carolina, and I've spent the last 19 years doing case management for adults with acquired disabilities, people who've had strokes, brain injuries, spinal cord damage, the kind of medical events that don't just change your body, but change how the world treats you afterward. I know what it looks like when someone is being managed instead of helped. I know the difference between a guardian who shows up and one who signs the forms and disappears. I know what happens to people when the system trusts the wrong person to speak for them. I knew it professionally before I understood it personally. The woman who made me understand it personally was sitting in the passenger seat of my car on a Tuesday morning in March 2024 with a paper grocery bag on her lap and the look of someone who has decided very carefully what they are and are not going to say. Her name was Alice. She was 11 years old. She had been referred to my agency's Family Preservation Unit by Buncombe County DSS 6 weeks earlier, after her school flagged a pattern of absences and a teacher named Mrs. Patricia Lee had written in Alice's file that the child, quote, seemed to be caring for an adult in the home rather than being cared for herself. I was assigned as the family support coordinator. What that means in practice is that I show up, I assess, I build a service plan, and I do not make assumptions until I have something worth assuming. The first time I went to the house on Haywood Road in West Asheville, Alice answered the door. She was in a school sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a braid she had clearly done herself. She looked at my ID badge with the focused attention of a child who had learned that documents mattered and that not everyone who showed them was trustworthy. "My mom's resting," she said. I told her I could come back. She said she'd been resting for 2 days. I asked if I could come in. She held the door open and stepped aside without saying anything else. The house was clean in a specific way. The kind of clean that means someone has put effort into it without having the right tools or enough time. The floors were swept but not mopped. The kitchen counter had a dish drying rack with 2 plates and a child-sized cup and a single adult mug. There was a pill organizer on the table, one of the large weekly ones, and Alice had filled it with a precision that made my chest do something I try not to let happen during home visits. Her mother was in the bedroom. Her name was Everett Calhoun. She was 34 years old. I noticed when I saw the file that we shared a last name, which happens more than people expect in Western North Carolina. She was small in the bed, not frail exactly, but the specific smallness of someone who has been horizontal too long. She had brown eyes that were sharp and alert even if the rest of her wasn't. She looked at me with the expression that adults in her situation often have, calibrating, waiting to find out which category I fell into. I told her who I was and why I was there. She said she'd been expecting someone to come eventually. I asked how long she'd been in bed. She said it had been a rough week. She said she had MS, multiple sclerosis, relapsing remitting, diagnosed 4 years prior. She said her neurologist was at Mission Hospital and that she had an appointment the following Thursday. She said her ex-husband had her car. That last part was delivered in the same flat tone as the rest of it, the way people state faiths they have decided not to make a production of because they don't have the energy left for productions. I asked where her ex-husband was. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Close enough to matter," she said. "Not close enough to help." I left that afternoon with a service plan started and the particular low-level dread I get when a situation is more complicated than the surface suggests. Alice walked me to the door. She was carrying the paper grocery bag, which I now saw contained a library book, a water bottle, and a composition notebook with her name written on the cover in careful block letters. "How long has she been like this?" I asked before I could stop myself. Alice looked at me with those careful eyes. "It comes and goes," she said. "But it's been more going lately." She said it exactly the way her mother had said the part about the car, as a fact, not a complaint. I drove home thinking about the pill organizer and the braid, and the 2 plates in the drying rack. The following week I met Vera's ex-husband for the first time. His name was Douglas Mack. He was 41 years old, and he ran a property management company out of an office on Marymount Avenue. He was the kind of man who filled a doorway, not because he was physically large, but because he had learned to position himself like an authority, even in spaces that weren't his. He had dark hair going silver at the temples, and a handshake that told you immediately he was the one deciding when it ended. He had arrived at Vera's house unannounced on a Wednesday morning while I was doing a scheduled home visit, which I would later understand was not a coincidence. He said he just wanted to check on Alice. I introduced myself. He already knew who I was. He said he was glad the county had sent someone, and that Vera's condition had been a concern of his for some time. Vera, from the kitchen table where she was sitting up today, said nothing. Alice, from the corner of the room where she was doing homework, said nothing. Douglas talked for 12 minutes about Vera's medical history, her limitations, her quote inability to maintain a stable environment. He used clinical language the way someone uses a borrowed tool, with effort, not fluency. He said he had consulted with an attorney about Alice's living situation. He said he had documentation. He said that last part while looking at me. I drove home that afternoon and pulled Vera's county case file and looked at everything I could access. Then I called my colleague in the Adult Protective Services Division, a woman named Rosalie Fuentes, who had 22 years on the job and a memory for family legal situations that I have never seen matched. I described Douglas Mack. Rosalie was quiet for a moment. "Pull the guardianship records," she said. I said Vera didn't have a guardian. She had capacity. She was making her own decisions. Rosalie said to pull the records anyway. It took me 3 days to understand what I was looking at when I did. Vera's mother, a woman named Eunice, had developed dementia in 2019. She had been moved to a memory care facility in Hendersonville. Douglas had been married to Vera at the time. Douglas had, at some point between 2019 and their divorce in 2022, been named Eunice's legal guardian, not by a court-initiated process but through a voluntary petition that Eunice had reportedly signed before her capacity was fully compromised. He had, according to the guardianship filing, been managing Eunice's finances and healthcare decisions for nearly 5 years. Eunice Pruitt had a house, a paid-off house on Kimberly Avenue in North Asheville worth, by current tax assessment, $412,000. The house was listed for sale. The listing had gone live 8 days before Douglas showed up at Vera's kitchen while I was there. I sat with that for a long time. I called Rosalie back. She said, "I know." I said, "He's liquidating the asset before anyone looks too closely." She said the guardianship had been reviewed twice by the court and cleared both times. She said Douglas had a lawyer who was good at paperwork. She said without a complaint from a family member or a flag from the care facility, the county couldn't initiate review on its own on the basis of what we had. I asked if Vera knew. Rosalie paused. "That's the question," she said. I went back to see Vera on a Friday afternoon, without a scheduled appointment, which is not something I do. She was sitting up in the living room this time, which was a better day. Alice was at school. The house had that same careful cleanliness, and there was a pot of soup on the stove that Vera had managed to make herself, which she mentioned with a small satisfaction that I understood. Not bragging, just noting what the body had allowed today. I sat across from her and I told her what I had found. Not all of it, but enough. I told her that her mother's house was listed for sale. I told her Douglas was the listed guardian of record. She set down her coffee mug. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she said, "He told me the house sold 2 years ago. He told me he'd had to cover Mom's care facility costs and the house proceeds had gone to that." I said nothing. Her jaw said it. "She's been at Mountain View Memory Care for 4 years, she said. 4 years at $3,200 a month. That's about $150,000. The house is worth $400,000. She was doing the math out loud. "The difference is $250,000, she said. "Where did it go?" She asked it the way you ask a question when you already know the answer isn't going to be good. I told her she needed a lawyer, not a general practice attorney. An elder law attorney who handled guardianship disputes and fiduciary misconduct. She said she couldn't afford a lawyer. I told her about Legal Aid of North Carolina's Elder Law Unit, which does intake on financial exploitation cases involving guardianship on a sliding scale basis. She looked at me for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "This isn't your job." I thought about the pill organizer. I thought about the braid. I thought about 2 plates in a drying rack. I said, "Alice is my job. Everything connected to Alice is my job." She looked at me for another beat. Then she picked up her coffee. "His name was worth a lot to him," she said. "Douglas Mack. He liked to be the name on things. The account, the lease, the guardianship. He liked the paperwork. He was good at it." "I know," I said. "He told everyone I couldn't manage things on my own because of my diagnosis. He said it in front of Alice. He said it to her teacher. He's been building a file, hasn't he?" I told her the truth. "Yes." She nodded once. "He's going to try to take her from me." "I don't know," I said. "But I know you need someone in your corner who understands the legal side of this faster than he's moving." She called legal aid that afternoon from my cell phone while I sat in her kitchen. Her intake attorney was a woman named Gail Torrance, 52 years old, with a practice history in elder financial exploitation that legal aid had specifically recruited her for 6 years prior. Gail did not move slowly. She pulled the guardianship file within 48 hours, cross-referenced the sale timeline against the care facility's billing records, and within 2 weeks had identified what she called a clear pattern of self-dealing. Douglas had moved Eunice's liquid assets into an account he controlled before petitioning for guardianship, and the house sale, which had not in fact happened 2 years ago but was in process now, would generate proceeds going to a trust he had established in his own name as trustee. Eunice had a surviving sister. Her name was Lorraine Pruitt, 71 years old, retired schoolteacher in Weaverville. Lorraine had not known about the guardianship until Gail called her. What Lorraine said when Gail called her is not something I heard directly. But Gail described it to me as the kind of controlled fury that arrives when someone realizes they've been deliberately kept out of a situation they would have intervened in if they'd known. Lorraine had a personal attorney. His name was Bart Hendricks, and he had 30 years of litigation experience in Henderson and Buncombe counties. He filed a petition to revoke Douglas's guardianship on a Thursday morning in April 2024. The same week, I filed a supplemental report with DSS documenting the specific ways Douglas's pattern of undermining Vera's medical credibility and parenting capacity had been deliberate and coordinated rather than a genuine concern for Alice's welfare. I documented the unannounced visit. I documented the clinical language he didn't actually know. I documented the fact that Alice was functioning above her grade level in school, was attached and attentive to her mother, and showed no signs of neglect. What she showed were signs of a child carrying adult stress because an outside party was creating instability, not because her mother was failing. The DSS supervisor reviewed my report on a Friday afternoon. She called me at 4:45 and said, "This closes in Vera's favor." I drove to Vera's house and told her. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Alice, who was eating a bowl of cereal for dinner because Vera was having a harder day. Alice looked up when I came in. She knew from my face that something had shifted, the way children who have been reading Adults for Survival always know. "Good news or complicated news?" Alice asked. "Both," I said. "Good first, then complicated?" She said okay. I told Vera that the DSS case was closing without any finding against her, that her parenting was documented as appropriate, that the flag Douglas had been building in Alice's school file was going to be addressed. Alice put her spoon down. She didn't say anything. Her mother reached across the table and put her hand over her daughter's, and Alice turned hers over so their palms were touching. "What's the complicated?" Vera asked. I said the legal matter involving her mother's estate was going to take longer, that Gail was confident but that court processes don't move fast and Douglas had a lawyer and it wasn't going to be resolved next week. Vera nodded. "He counted on me being too sick to fight," she said. Alice looked at her mother. "Are you too sick to fight?" "No," Vera said. "Not even a little. There's a thing I've seen in this work that I never find a clean way to describe. It's the moment when someone who has been told repeatedly that they are incapable, too sick, too unstable, too dependent, decides out loud that they're not. It doesn't look like the movies. It doesn't look triumphant or loud. It looks like a woman with MS on a hard day, eating dinner with her daughter, saying 5 words with her spine completely straight, not even a little." The guardianship revocation hearing happened in Buncombe County Superior Court on June 17, 2024. I was not present. Gail called me afterward. She said the word she used to describe Douglas in that courtroom was exposure. She said Bart Hendricks had documentation of 3 separate asset transfers that Douglas had not disclosed in the original petition. She said the judge had used the phrase breach of fiduciary duty twice before Douglas's attorney had even finished his opening remarks. The guardianship was revoked. A professional guardian was appointed by the court to manage Eunice's remaining affairs. The house sale was frozen pending a forensic accounting of what had happened to the proceeds of Eunice's liquid assets. Douglas was not arrested that day. That's not how civil guardianship proceedings work. But the referral to the district attorney's office for review of potential elder financial exploitation under North Carolina General Statute 14-112.2 was made before the end of the week. I want to stop here and say something clearly, because I think it matters. Douglas Mack did not hit anyone. He did not raise his voice in the courtroom. He wore a good suit and spoke in measured tones and used the language of concern. He had done all of this. The guardianship, the financial maneuvering, the quiet erosion of Vera's credibility as a mother, with the composure of a man who believed that if you stay calm enough and sign enough forms, you get to decide what the record says. He believed Vera was too sick to keep up with him. He believed Alice would eventually come to him by default. He believed Eunice's assets would be gone before anyone organized themselves enough to look for them. He was wrong on every count. He just didn't know that yet. The summer of 2024 was the first summer in 3 years that Alice spent primarily at her mother's house, without the background hum of Douglas inserting himself into their routine. He had, as part of the guardianship proceedings, been identified as a party of interest in a financial exploitation investigation, which his attorney had advised him meant keeping his distance from anything that could be characterized as additional pressure on Vera. That distance was, in its own way, its own kind of justice. Alice turned 12 in July. Vera was having a better stretch medically, not a remission exactly, but one of those periods where the disease is quieter and the body cooperates more than it fights. She made Alice's birthday cake herself, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, lopsided on one side in a way she described without apology as architecturally expressive. Alice ate 2 pieces and declared it perfect. I know this because I was there. I want to be precise about how that happened, because I know how it sounds and I want to be honest about the timeline. I had been Vera's family support coordinator for 5 months. The professional relationship was going to end when the DSS case closed, which it did in May. I made a referral to a community health worker through her MS clinic and a connection to a volunteer home assistance program through the county. I had done my job. I also knew, by the time I closed her file, that I had never met anyone who handled genuinely hard circumstances with the specific combination of clarity and quiet humor and bone-deep determination that Vera Pruitt, she'd taken her maiden name back after the divorce, handled them with. I called Gail before I did anything else. I told her what I was considering. Gail said I needed to wait until the legal proceedings were fully resolved and there was no professional ambiguity about my relationship to the family. She said it with the directness of a woman who had seen complicated situations get messier when people didn't think sequentially. I waited. The DA's office filed charges against Douglas Mack in September 2024. The charge was felony financial exploitation of an elder, a Class F felony under North Carolina law. His attorney negotiated. The plea and sentencing process took until the following spring. In March 2025, Douglas Mack entered a plea of guilty to 2 counts of financial exploitation and was sentenced to 22 months supervised probation. Restitution ordered in the amount of $218,000 to Eunice Pruitt's court-managed estate. Permanent revocation of any guardian or trustee status in the state of North Carolina, and mandatory financial ethics training. He did not go to prison. I want to be honest about how I felt about that, because I think people deserve honesty more than they deserve a tidy narrative. I thought the sentence was light. A lot of people who work in elder law thought the sentence was light. A Class F felony can carry active prison time. His attorney argued first offense, no physical harm, expression of remorse. The judge weighed it the way judges weigh these things. What I came back to was this. Douglas Mack's entire architecture had been built on the belief that Vera was manageable, that she was too sick, too financially limited, too isolated to do anything about what he was doing. He had structured everything so that the documents pointed one way and the truth pointed another, betting that no one would take the time to read carefully enough. And then a teacher named Mrs. Lee wrote something in a school file, and a social worker showed up, and a colleague said, "Pull the records." And a legal aid attorney knew what she was looking at, and a retired school teacher in Weaverville got a phone call and picked up. He had counted on the gaps. The gaps didn't hold. I called Vera on the day the sentencing was announced. Was at a physical therapy appointment. She had started going twice a week since the medical transport voucher program I'd connected her to had made it logistically possible. Alice was in school. It was a Tuesday. She was quiet at the sentencing. "Is it enough?" she asked. I said I didn't know if enough was the right frame. I said what mattered was that the record was permanent. That he couldn't do this to anyone else in North Carolina under a guardianship. That Eunice's money, what was recoverable, was going back to Eunice's estate. That Alice's file at school had been corrected. Another pause. "My mom," she said, is she going to understand any of this?" I said I didn't know. I said that was a question for her mother's care team at Mountain View. I said that sometimes people with dementia understand more than we assume, and sometimes they understand things differently than we do, and that either way, someone had done right by Eunice, even if Eunice couldn't fully know it. Vera didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, I used to feel guilty that I couldn't manage it all. The MS, Alice, my mom, the financial stuff. I felt like I was failing at all of it simultaneously. I said you weren't failing. You were being actively undermined by someone who needed you to fail. She said, I know that now. She said it simply. The way people say things when understanding has had time to settle into the body. I'll tell you about the personal part carefully, because it's not the center of this story and I don't want it to function like one. Vera and I had our first dinner that wasn't in any professional capacity in November 2024. It was at a Vietnamese restaurant on Lexington Avenue in Asheville. She ordered the lemongrass chicken and ate most of mine when she finished hers, which told me what I needed to know about her. We took it at whatever pace the situation required, which is slower than most things. Because Alice needed the space to understand what was happening, and Vera's MS means that good weeks and hard weeks don't always announce themselves in advance. And I have been in this work long enough to know that relationships built on crisis don't always survive the quiet. We made sure it was built on the quiet. Alice, for her part, is not a child who does things without deciding to do them. She observed the situation for about 4 months with the focused attention of someone collecting data. She asked me exactly 2 direct questions during that time, both in separate car rides when it was just the 2 of us, and she had clearly decided the opportunity was right. The first question was whether I was going to make decisions for her mother the way Douglas had. I said no. I said that her mother made her own decisions and that my job was to show up, not to manage. She thought about that for a minute. The second question was whether I understood that her mother had MS and that it wasn't going to get better, and that what that meant practically was that there were going to be hard stretches, and I needed to be the kind of person who understood that the hard stretches were part of it, not a reason to leave. I said yes. She said okay, and then she turned up the radio and didn't bring it up again. I proposed to Vera on a Sunday morning in April 2025 in her kitchen on Haywood Road. She was making the lopsided pancakes she'd apparently been making for Alice, since Alice was small. Not perfectly round, never perfectly round, but always called something other than what they were. Clouds that morning, because Alice had been reading a book about meteorology and Vera said it seemed thematic. I had the ring in my jacket pocket, and I had been building towards saying the thing for 2 weeks, and I decided, standing there watching her not apologize for the imprecise circles, that the moment was already right, and I was just the one who hadn't caught up yet. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Alice from the table said she had known since December. We were married in August 2025, small ceremony at a friend's property in Fairview with the mountains behind us. Alice stood next to Vera. My brother Caleb stood next to me, which meant a lot because Caleb lives in Knoxville and made the drive without being asked twice. The officiant was a Buncombe County magistrate with the steady quiet of someone who understood that the moment mattered and didn't need to ornament it. We did not do it big. We did it real. Here is where things stand now as I'm writing this in the winter of 2025. Alice is 13 years old. She is in 7th grade and is, according to her language arts teacher, writing essays that belong in a high school classroom. She has started attending a youth science program at the Asheville Museum of Science. She checks the pill organizer some mornings still, not because Vera asks her to, but because it's a habit she built when she needed it and is slowly learning to put down. We're working on that together. Vera Pruitt Calhoun, she took my name, she mentioned it without drama one morning over coffee, and that was that, is 35 years old. She sees her neurologist every 3 months. She has a medical transport account that actually functions now. She has a part-time administrative position at her MS clinic, doing patient outreach, which she is very good at because she has been on the other side of the desk and knows what people actually need to hear. On the hard days, she is honest about what she needs. On the good days, she makes things that are clearly circles and calls them whatever seems right. Eunice Pruitt is 71 years old and is at Mountain View Memory Care. She has good days and harder days in the way that people with her condition do. On a good day in October, Vera brought Alice to visit, and Eunice looked at Alice for a long moment and said, "There's my Vera," and reached out and touched Alice's face. Whether she knew she had the names mixed up doesn't matter. The gesture was right. The restitution process for Eunice's estate is ongoing. Gail is managing it. Gail says what is recoverable will be recovered. The house did not sell. The freeze held. It is being managed now by the court-appointed professional guardian, and the proceeds, when it does sell, will go to Eunice's care and then, in whatever is left, to Vera as the sole surviving heir. Douglas Mack is in the 22nd month of his supervised probation. He made his first restitution payment in January 2025, 3 months late. His attorney has communicated with Gail's office twice regarding payment schedule modifications. Gail has communicated back with the patience of someone who has done this for 30 years and is not in any hurry, because the order is the order and the interest accrues and time is not on his side. He has not contacted Vera. He has not contacted Alice. He is not permitted to serve as a guardian or trustee for anyone in the state of North Carolina for the rest of his life. That is a permanent record. That does not expire when his probation does. He built his entire approach on the premise that a woman with a chronic illness, limited income, and no legal resources was someone he could work around. He spent years convincing people, her, Alice's school, anyone who'd listen, that Vera wasn't capable of understanding what was happening in her own life. She understood all of it. She had understood for longer than he knew. She just didn't have the tools at the right moment. What changed wasn't Vera. Vera was always exactly who she is. What changed was that the gaps he had been counting on, the spaces between systems, between counties, between case files and guardianship records, and school flags and care facility billing statements, all of those spaces happened to have people in them who were paying attention on the day it mattered. A teacher who wrote something down. A colleague who said, "Pull the records." An attorney who knew what the discrepancy meant. A retired schoolteacher who picked up the phone. He had been so focused on the official record that he had forgotten about the people behind it. I teach families every day that systems are not the same thing as the people who work inside them. Systems have gaps. People close them when they decide to, when they're paying attention, when they don't look at something complicated and decide it belongs to someone else. A man named Douglas Mack believed that documents were power, that if you controlled the signatures, you controlled the story. He spent years building a record designed to make one woman look like she couldn't manage her own life. The record didn't hold. The story he wrote is not the one anyone is living. Alice is living hers. Vera is living hers. And Douglas Mack, 3 years after he walked into that kitchen on Haywood Road, like he had the authority to define what happened there, is making restitution payments to a court-managed account, while the family he thought he could dismantle is, on Sunday mornings, eating pancakes that are always called something other than what they are, and always, somehow, exactly right.